Dhurandhar by Aditya Dhar is not exactly a movie that should have been called as some sort of a exciting endeavor anyway, because if you look at it, Aditya Dhar's biggest like accomplishment in a way was creating a sensible action thriller, military style action thriller in the vein of Uri. But of course, there is a high streak of propaganda within it. And the good thing about Aditya Dhar, which I say good, but the good thing about Aditya Dhar, which separates him from the rest of the pack, is at least the propaganda streak is not so high enough that it becomes nauseous. Like, I think it is pretty evident which side of the political spectrum I'm falling in at this point. But I think one of the biggest advantages of Dhurandhar is the fact that in an effort to make the unvarnished version of their vision, which is a 7 hour long epic, what makes Dhurandhar, quote unquote Dhurandhar Part 1, so good is the fact that almost 90% of the movie takes place in Karachi. It goes linearly. 90% of the movie taking place within Pakistan, within the town of Liari, completely focusing on the inner politics and becoming a gangster drama in the process, but also following essentially the pattern or the layout of a western, where we see Ranveer Singh's character, who is named Hamza here, essentially a loner drifting into a town, ingratiating himself with the rest of the pack under instructions from somebody. We know who the instructions are, but at least in the movie it is not shown so overtly. Like, we know what is going on, but the best part of Dhurandhar, at least in the first half, is the assimilation of Ranveer Singh's Hamza into the underworld follows a template that is still not as evident as it used to be, which is why you can actually get invested within the world that Aditya Dhar and his team are trying to create. And Ranveer Singh's performance, which is so restrained, like it reminded me of his performance in Gully Boy or Dil Dhadakne Do. So that restraint is highly working here, because it definitely also reminded me of a TV show called Andor, where Cassian Andor, as played by Diego Luna, is easily the least interesting character in a show completely about him, because he is both the audience surrogate, and also he is the person who is bringing a sense of morality, and also he is reacting to all the events surrounding him, which is exactly what is happening within Dhurandhar. Because for the majority of the film, at least in this entire movie, one of the bigger criticisms that should be afforded to this movie is also one of the reasons why I like this movie, is the fact that we don't get any backstory of him. We learn and we understand what Ranveer Singh's character is. We learn who Hamza is, because he is reacting to the environment around him, and thus slowly and steadily he is creating his cover. And we, the audience, is part of that ruse, because we, the audience, are also part of his cover. We are essentially seeing what he is becoming. The only hints and shades do come if the movie affords us to actually give us hints as to what he's actually planning to do. Then, as Dhurandhar's plot progresses, the plot becomes essentially a exercise in world building, and it's impeccable in a way, because the production design, the cinematography, the action set pieces, as few as they are actually much more grounded than you would expect from a typical masala tale. Though too much use of slow motion, seriously, did not need that. I do also liked that in an effort to make world building possible, you need interesting and quirky personalities. And Akshay Khanna's Rahman Dakayat is essentially, like the kids call, he's order-farming. He is like having a ball. He is. I will argue that it is essentially a two-hander between Ranveer Singh and Akshay Khanna's character. Like, the movie is essentially about the two of them, in a way. The movie is essentially about Ranveer Singh's character slowly and steadily making his way within this within this entire world. While the story is also about Akshay Khanna's character consolidating his power as Rahman Baloch within the underworld of Karachi, and how those two plot lines are ultimately going to converge. And of course, within that prospect is not just the fact that the Indian intelligence service led by Ajay Sanyal, who is obviously Ajit Doval, played by R Madhavan, whose plan to essentially like relaunch Project Dhurandhar, which basically means that he's going to ensure to send an agent to infiltrate the underworld of Pakistan, so that they can definitively establish a link between terrorism and the underworld, as well as try to counter that. It is an interesting idea. How much of it is true, I have no idea. But you get the point that this story is ultimately filled with multitude of plots and politics, and it can become exhausting. But I can understand why the creators did not want to skimp out, because there are so many details that actually make the world feel lived in. But there are also moments like Sanjay Dutt's introduction in a chapter called The Jinn, which felt very cartoonish. I think Sanjay Dutt's character and Sanjay Dutt as an actor, I think he is one of the weaker links of this movie quite easily. Genuinely, because as long as he's being menacing and he's being antagonistic, he works as a foil, but his introduction and his overall attitude to the world, a sarcastic nature, a loud-mouthed, gregarious version of any of the innumerable iterations that Sanjay Dutt plays, that felt very inconsistent with the real world tonality that this movie kind of has. And of course, the romantic subplot. I'm not saying that Sarah Arjun's character, Sarah Arjun as an actress is bad. I don't think she is. I do think that the romance subplot, it's not that it's not developed, it's that it doesn't actually matter as much, except for a political maneuvering towards the end. But other than that, it doesn't really matter. So it feels like it is taking up too much real estate. I do have to say that the question that does arise is whether it's a propaganda film, and how are we supposed to judge it as such. I would say that quote unquote anti-Pakistan rhetoric that is being the anti-Pakistan rhetoric that is being utilized here, genuinely speaking, the facts of the matter that is presented here, you can't exactly argue and call that a rhetoric. Like, there is a sequence post the interval where essentially a red screen comes, and then we see a transcript of real conversations during the 26/11 attack, that I understand what it is actually trying to do. I understand the intent being to hammer home the horror, and also to remind the audience that what you had been seeing was actually a world that is being created that is very insular within the bylanes of Karachi, but the overall world outside is being affected by the actions within the bylanes of Karachi, and it is to hammer home that point, and it is also to hammer home that at the end of the day, what Hamza's mission is far greater than just being the king of a trash pile. Even though I think the continual two part will show that being a king of a trash pile might be his actual intention, or might be his actual ambition. But the it's not that the effects of propaganda aren't there. They are actually. The opening sequence, which evokes IC-814 Kandahar hijack, not evoke, it's essentially recreating that. Those sequences, out of those sequences, there is one sequence with a gun and Jai Mata Di section that is clearly meant to elicit anger. A dialogue of the cowardice of Hindus, again clearly meant to elicit anger. And those are the moments where you realize, oh, you kinda understand what movie you are seeing, or the fact that every other time when the action shifts to Madhavan's Ajay Sanyal, he explains why his hands are tied by essentially reminding us that quote unquote अच्छे दिन आएंगे, or that politicians will come in power who would have the interest of the citizens more than the current era, essentially informing us post 2014 whatever is going to happen. It's a different argument that how much of what the film is actually saying about Achhe Din actually happens, but that's neither here nor there. I'm just saying that I can't discount the fact that it is a propaganda film, because it is. I can't also discount the fact that it doesn't wear its propaganda so much on its sleeve that it overwhelms the overall narrative, because it doesn't. The propaganda is sprinkled rather than it completely taking over and becoming a jingoistic mess. It doesn't allow itself to be a jingoistic mess, because at the end of the day it is both an espionage film and it is also a gangster film. And the fact that the first this entire movie is focused so much on the gangster drama of it all, and to an extent I think even the second movie is going to be that it allows an audience to breathe into and enter a world of toxic, of utterly despicable men, of men who lie for a living, of men who lie for their survival. And at the end of the day, because the shift is entirely in a different country, you can actually afford the blame to that country rather than affording any sort of blame, or any sort of blame to your own, which is, I think, a critical way to actually adjust any sort of critical lens. But does that mean that your film criticism or your criticism of the movie shouldn't account for the propaganda? No, of course it should. I'm just saying it cannot be the only thing that should be a judgment call. I'm saying that the movie's sound design is iffy enough that it should be a judgment call about the technical issue of the movie. I'm saying that some of the songs were very much unnecessary in the context of the movie and could have been excised, especially considering it's a 3 hours and 40 minutes long movie that is also the beginning of a second, that is also the first of a 7-hour long epic. It could have been edited down, it could have been trimmed down, but I should also say that I should give credit to the makers. I should give credit to the makers to make this 3 hours and 40 minutes long odyssey engaging enough that you are at least glued to the screen. So, Dhurandhar, I will say a watch in the theater, definitely a watch in the theater, and I am looking forward to the March 2026 release of the second part. Here's hoping it is as good as the first, though I will have to say I saw the zinger and I'm like, I mean, sure, there is more blood, there is more gore, but if your intent was to capture all the fans of Sandeep Reddy Vanga's Animal, I think they might be disappointed in this part and they might be looking forward to that part. And considering I'm not a fan, I am very, let's say, tad bit skeptical. But here's hoping. At least the movie narratively did not disappoint me. So I'm a simple man. If I see world building done right, if I see action sequences done right, and if I see restrained acting done well, you have me as a fan, man. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, I know that this is a long video. I know that this is a video that is coming out after so long. So for all the subscribers who are there in the channel, I'm shocked that you still are, but thank you so much for being there. Thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for encouraging. Thank you to my friends who are telling me to upload more. I will upload more, I sincerely hope. And do like, do share, and do subscribe. And yes, I know that there are some viewers who are saying that I should speak more in Bengali. I will try. This is more, how do I put this? This is far more interesting and far more comfortable for me. That's it. Thank you so much.